Hello everyone, I'm Cyrus Hojadi. This interview is being recorded on February 15th, 2011. This interview wants to make some things clear. Clear about my plans and goals about changing and reforming the way we design our cities and towns. Now, one thing I want to make clear is I want to bring some facts and real myths about the change and reform that is needed to alter the auto-dependent suburban sprawl. Now, I would really like to tack down a lot of my critics, the critics of this kind of reform and the people who defend this kind of development. Let me first tell you who they are. One of the two leading figures of these people are Randal O'Toole and Wendell. And these are the two most prominent figures of auto-dependent sprawl. One of the myths that they mention is that to deliver mixed-use, walkable, and transit-oriented planning, you have to take everyone out of their cars, and put them in higher density, high-rise developments. That, of course, is a myth. And one of the things they tell you, of course, is the fact is that in these auto-dependent suburbs, there's a lot of freedom and liberty. That, of course, is a huge myth. Because if you go to those auto-dependent suburbs, there's a lot of codes, zoning laws, regulations for, parking minimums, parking requirements, building setback to the streets, a lot of building codes, a lot of street dimensions, a lot of land use segregated patterns, a lot of codes to implement the housing subdivisions. There's a lot of subsidies for the infrastructure, for the telecommunication lines. There is tons and tons of regulations for these auto-dependent suburbs. So there's hardly any freedom being given, other than the fact that you're getting a single-family home with a yard around it, which I highly, highly respect. One of these people believe, they mentioned that we should privatize all the freeways. Yes, of course, private sector does a better job. But first of all, where are you going to get the room to privatize the freeway if they want to build more? You don't have enough room underground. You don't have enough room on the sides. That may not always be the scenario. And even if people want to commute long distance, not everybody wants to drive. Car is a hassle. There's just too much responsibility. There's too much costs. Some people cannot drive. They're too young. They're too old. There's health concerns that people may have. They may be drunk. And some people just don't even have a driver's license. The Department of Motor Vehicles is just a pain in the butt. The other things they mention is that Portland, a city that has implemented mixed use and diverse cities, is a disaster. That is absolutely false. Many indicators prove that Portland's Max Rail is full of passengers. And if you want, I can show you the images and the rail statistics. Also, they fail to mention that Portland is putting everybody in high-density areas. That is also false. Portland, of course, a leading indicator of this type of development, is still doing auto-dependent sprawl with tract housing and housing subdivisions. If you go to D.R. Horton, they're still doing this auto-dependent sprawl. So the real factor is that a lot of these, new urbanism policies of smart growth and transit-oriented developments is not dominant. They're still sprawling in an auto-dependent fashion. And they also say that a lot of their policies help fuel housing prices at the level that makes it very, very unaffordable. That is a myth. There are cities that are on the outer parts of the Portland metropolitan area that are under 200,000, even on the peak of the housing boom. So what that really, really indicates is that there's not a strong demand to live in those auto-dependent suburbs, but there's a strong demand to live in those urban environments that are very, very attractive and transit-oriented. So that means that we should build more mixed-use, more walkable cities. They also mentioned Houston, Dallas, and Atlanta. Oh, they're, the king when it comes to affordability, and they didn't see housing price bubbles and so forth. And there's a lot of myths to that. The reason that, yes, of course, the income and the home price ratio is lower than it is in Portland. But that is part of the reason, because those areas have a lot of unattractive, low desirable areas that lowers the home price. And remember, they're talking about home price, not land price. See, you have to distinguish between the two in many cases. And of course, according to Planetizen, a urban planning, website, one researcher mentioned that Atlanta saw their prices fall a lot more than Portland. So this idea that it has a correlation between land, use, and mixed use and transit-oriented planning is simply a joke. And of course, cities like Austin and Charlotte that didn't see major housing bubbles saw tons and tons of new urbanism developments. And another thing that I wanted to get across is that housing prices, let me show you some other facts. How come other, towns and other walkable environments like Celebration, Florida, like historic Savannah and Charleston along the Atlantic coast, how come those areas are so expensive and their home prices are so much higher compared to the nearby auto-dependent areas? Well, that indicates that a lot of people want these walkable, these mixed-use, these very, very attractive urban environments. And then what about many places in California? They saw huge price housing jumps, but they didn't see, these urban growth boundaries or these mixed-use planning and transit-oriented planning. Come on, I've lived in the Inland Empire. They did tons and tons of auto-dependent sprawl. They did tons and tons of housing subdivisions, and yet we saw hardly any mixed-use and diverse development from new urbanism. One of the things that he fails to understand is that the automobile is a huge burden. There's a lot of high fatality rates. These criticizers, they always mention. There's the increased chance of parking tickets. There's insurance, DMV, car payment, registration, dealing with high gas prices, all these things that we have to pay. And that's one of the things that these people fail to realize. And I just think that people just have to get the message across. So if you can, please subscribe to my videos, and I will have more information about this topic.